Right now in Genshin, defense is very, very close to being a dead stat. It's to the point that it almost serves as a filler stat to lower the chances of getting a decent artifact. Unless your name is Noel or Abedo, you actively don't want to go anywhere near anything with the worst defense on it. So today I want to talk about that, and why Genshin is this way. Because shouldn't defense be one of the key parts of an RPG-esque game? Basically every RPG game, doesn't really matter what you look at, has the stats, attack, defense, and HP, you know them. Those are the pillars of this genre, and they're all built around these like stats. So why has defense been so irrelevant in this? The TLDR of all this is that, probably what you're thinking, Genshin is just not too difficult of a game and that we don't have any content that favors survivability. And you're right. But in my opinion, there's a little bit more to that than you think. Because here's the thing, this isn't really a Genshin problem, and it's one that fundamentally baked into the RPG genre and spans multiple games. Nearly all games at some point lean into optimizing offensive stats over defensive ones, especially single player ones. And here's the reason why. For purposes of damage dealers, after a certain point, stacking defense actually increases the damage you take. For discussion, I want to jump over to a game that's occupied way too much of my time as a kid, and one where discussion was talked about quite a bit, Runescape. For those who don't know, Runescape is for the most part a medieval and European MMORPG, but for the context of the video, what I want to focus on is the history of shields in this game. In Runescape, you have both a weapon and offhand weapon slot. You can equip a two-handed weapon that takes both slots, or a one-handed weapon and an offhand item. What most people did in the older version of this game was they went melee with a scimitar. Because magic in range consumed ammunition, melee is preferred because there's no upkeep to bashing a person with a sword. And scimitars were the strongest basic one-handed weapon, so people just defaulted to that. Back in the old days, the only offhand option for a low to medium level player were shields. So, what happened was the vast majority of players in RuneScape when they started, they went for a scimitar and shield combination because that was the most efficient combo. This went on until 2011, when RuneScape launched the Evolution of Combat update. This update completely rehauled the game, changing a simple combat to a more complex one, and completely redid the looks of the game as well. But for the purposes of this video, I want to look at the effects of one particular change. This update came with the ability to dual-wield weapons, which I think is like one of the coolest updates that has ever happened to RuneScape. You can now equip offhand weapons to increase your damage and unlock more damaging abilities by doing so. Also, it just looks super cool. This update completely changed the game by providing a choice. On paper, players would now have the choice between either opting for a shield for more safety, or an offhand weapon for more damage. So given this change, what do you think happened? Would be in certain situations, use a shield over a sword? And you will have to make a judgment call on which one was better for what situation. Not really. The reality is, the change caused the price of shields to utterly crash into nothing. Part of it was that people just wanted to dual wield, and can you blame them? I was one of those guys too. But the major problem was that the change made a certain characteristic of the game come very much to light, and rendered shields nearly obsolete outside of a switch used for shield abilities. Let me provide some examples of how bad it is in the current RuneScape right now. The best shield in RuneScape 3 are the Rise of 6 shields, which are tier 90. On average, these shields cost 6.5 to 6.8 million gold coins each. The tier 90 melee weapons, the Drygores, cost 22 to 35 million gold coins each. This is a massive difference. The weapons already cost up to 5 times more than the shields, but as a catch to all this, that doesn't make this a fair comparison. These sets of items drop from 2 different bosses of vastly different difficulties. The shields drop from the Rise of 6 boss fight the 6 Barrels brothers, while with the Drygores you have to fight the Calphite King. Of these two, which one do you think is the harder fight? The answer is the Rise of 6 by a large margin. The Rise of 6 is a hard team-based boss fight with tight DPS checks that requires an experienced team to clear efficiently. The Calphite King is an easy team boss that can even be soloed by skilled players. When we compare the Rise of 6 shields to other harder to earn tier 90 weapons, the price gets even more damning. Ascension crossbows are 100 million gold coins each. Slicing Wand and Book are 150 million gold coins each. And Noxious weapons like the bow and staff are 165 million gold coins each, while the scythe is 230 million gold coins each. In case you're wondering, RuneScape 3 is currently on tier 92 weapons, and there are no tier 92 shields. There haven't been any better shields in the game since the Rise of 6 came out in around 2013. Again, aside from being used as a switch, shields are a dead mechanic in modern RuneScape. Let me just show you guys directly why this happens. In this example, I'll be testing both a shield and dual wield setup. I'll be fighting a giant bull, the strongest boss I can fight without paying a subscription with both a shield and dual wield setup. I'll be fighting the boss 10 times, 5 times the shield, 5 times dual wielding, and I'll record the time it takes for a kill and the damage taken during the fight. I want to clarify that there's going to be some variation between the results I get. The boss fight has mechanics that affects both time and damage taken, so the number I get aren't going to be totally accurate averages of my time and damage taken. I need a bit more than 5 runs to get the more accurate results. But I don't think that matters in this case. The point is to show that there is a visible difference between the two setups, even at this small numbers. Okay, now for the results. Let's start with the time taken to kill the mole. I expect the dual wield setup was faster than the shield setup. Kills with shield average around 5 minutes and 1 second. Kills dual wielding average around 3 minutes and 53 seconds. That's a bit over a 1 minute difference, so time wise dual wielding is superior, but again, that's to be expected. Now moving on to damage taken. On average, for each kill with a shield, we took around 1,770 damage, while dual wielding, for each kill while dual wielding, I took around 1,408 damage. So it would seem strangely, dual wielding reduces the amount of damage taken compared to shields. I do want to bring up again, there is a bit of variance regarding this section. During the final phase of the mole fight, it has instances where it uses 2 special attacks from the previous phases. If it chooses a certain high hitting special attack repeatedly, it results in fights where you take significantly more damage. That's why there are so many fights where the amount of damage you've taken can vary quite a bit. But here's what's important. Even through all the fights I did, including a lot of test fights I didn't record, and a few of the fights I did to compare methods of comparison, running a shield always resulted in more damage taken. It also didn't, or at the very least, it resulted in such little damage mitigation it was basically the same as going dual wield. The reason for this is the time it takes to kill the boss. You see, while the shield is mitigating the damage you take, there is a 1 minute difference between the two styles, and during that 1 minute, you take significantly more damage than you're mitigating with the shield. The longer a fight goes, the more damage you take. It is especially the case for difficult fights. Going back to the final phase of the mole, a lot of the damage the shield build took was during this phase. Because the shield takes longer to clear this phase, it has to face more special attacks than the dual wield build has to. The shorter a fight goes, the fewer instances of damages and chances of damages you face, and to a certain point, trading defense for offense to lower the amount of time in a fight will result in significantly less damage taken. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, the point of defense is to provide enough time for you to get in the damage without dying yourself. The goal of every single combat game is to get an opponent's health bar to 0, and we want to do that as efficiently as humanly possible, and for the most part, we want to do it as fast as possible. Therefore, RPGs, or just games that focus on combat in general, are always about trying to do as much damage while handling the game's challenges. Defense is only good up to a point where you can survive comfortably. Once you hit that point, more defense becomes redundant. Every single game has a different relationship between incoming damage and your own survivability. Some games have enemies that do a ton damage, and other games have enemies that don't do too much. What the goal or meta becomes is finding the place point where you have survivability to deal with the damage the game throws at you and invest the rest into damage yourself. In Runescape 3, for an instance, the character gets innate defensive stats from armor, damage mitigation from prayers, and lifesteal effect from scrimshaws and the soul split prayer. So investing a weapon slot into defense isn't necessary anymore, and why shields absolutely vanished when the game changed. Though truth be told, this was even the case in old school Runescape, where we eventually pivoted from shields to an offensive offhand item called a defender, when the option came up towards the late game. On the other hand, other games that have more difficult mechanics demand more survivability from the player and require more defensive stat building as a result. Let me talk about another game I played quickly, League of Legends. In League, I basically main Aatrox, a reasonably mobile melee character that wants to handle the front line. Because I am a frontliner, I am more susceptible to a lot of damage. I am often in a position to be taking damage from the enemy's team's main carries, and I need to build accordingly to this. So, to handle this tough situation, I need to build defensive items and ensure I don't instantly die compared to other characters that have more innate defensive options, like dashes or shields or something like that. At the same time, I don't want to build too defensive, otherwise I simply don't do enough damage to be a threat. So, my goal each game is gauging how much defense versus offense I need to build. All of the combat-based games have this balance and handle it in different ways. While for instance, when taking on a powerful boss, certain characters take on the role of tank and others support to ensure that damage dealers can comfortably burn down a boss. And there are a lot of examples of this from basically every single game you can think of. The point is, the players are constantly pushed to find a balance where they have the minimal amount of defense to comfortably survive and then stack the rest into damage so they can actually kill whatever enemy they're facing. Now, after all that, let's actually get to the point of all this and talk about how Genshin handles these systems. Genshin is really not a difficult game. Because of that, for the most part there isn't really pressure to build defensively. For maybe 90% of the content in this game, the numbers just aren't high enough for you to care about defenses. Just some base stats of characters alone in relation to enemy damage. The damage you take really isn't that high. When your character is appropriately leveled, the challenge you're facing, at most you're going to take maybe a 10th of your health, maybe 15 when you're against an elite enemy. And that might sound like a lot, but considering how much enemies miss in this game, really isn't. Unlike RuneScape, damage in Genshin is not mandatory. Nearly all the damage comes from heavily telegraphed attacks and then most of them are also easily dodgeable as well. It's so much so that if you run in a straight line, you can avoid most of the damage in this game. It takes so little it doesn't matter. Genshin is a game where dodging is a method of survivability. The game is designed so if you move and dodge at the right time, you can avoid all the damage the enemy throws at you. So this is a means of survivability innately built into the game, it can be used by any character. So this combined with the general base stats of most characters means there really isn't much of a point in being defensive. Healers and damage negation is nice for long fights, because damage can add up, but it doesn't demand enough from your main DPS to actually care about defensive stats. There's also another part to all this, and that's how a major mechanic in Genshin works, shields. The thing about shields is they pass over from character to character. This means we can put the burden of defense on one character, mainly a flex support, and pass that survivability to main damage dealer, so we can play more recklessly and worry less about dodging. But shields have another characteristic in this game, and that's they can make you completely immune to being pushed around or CC'd. This is probably the biggest reason why shields are so dominant in our meta. You see, one of the biggest punishments for actually being hit by enemies is not the damage you take, but the crowd control you face or the threat of being pushed around or knocked up. Because when you're knocked back or knocked up, you face the threat of not being able to dodge out of a move, and that can lead to taking a series of hits. Think of when you let a Whopper Flower charge out, or you face a giant bunch of geofish shafts that are constantly flailing around. Getting hit by one attack can lead you to a bunch of more, and that's when things get dangerous. Because of this, shields are always better than defensive stats because they allow you to ignore these dangerous mechanics and just focus on damage combos. In a strange way, shields actually increase the damage you deal, because instead of focusing on dodging all the time, you can focus on dealing damage. This is really important for some of the squishier characters in this game, like Klee and Yanfei, and Eula, who in particular really needs to focus on her combos, so a shield is really beneficial for her. It also means we have the ability to transfer defensive capabilities from one character to another, and not only that, but in a way that is significantly stronger than just building defensive stats on said character. Now here's the funny part of why defense stat is particularly useless. You see, shields in Genshin Impact scale either off of HP or defense, so you think that defense would be a great stat to farm for support. But for some reason, all the good current shield characters scale off of HP, while the more lackluster ones scale off defense. Defense scalers are Xingyan and Noelle, who have their own issues, in comparison to Diona and Zhongli, who in general have really good supportive abilities. Zhongli in particular is so strong that he's basically a de facto shield support for basically everyone. On top of that, there's Hu Tao, who is the strongest DPS in the game, and benefits greatly from HP. So HP isn't this really valuable stat over defense. I think it has something to do with just HP being a stat that's inherently bigger numbers, so characters tend to that scale off it benefit more, so that's just more of a thought, not something I've looked into. The only use of defense as a stat is for characters that scale off it extremely well, such as Noelle, Albedo, and Xingyan, who ironically build defense because it makes them deal even more damage. So again, the reason why no one in Genshin builds defense is that they don't have to. The game has so inherent ways to mitigate damage, that along with base HP and base defense is now for all content with a bit of healing and a little bit of mitigation. Shields is an incredibly strong mechanic that allows one character to completely shoulder the burden of defense for other characters, in a way that's stronger than building defense on your usual characters. And then there's still content in Genshin that requires you that much survivability. So one more thing I want to talk about before I wrap up this video, and that's if this will change in the future. Every now and then, you see a bit of discussion talking about how our current gameplay focuses too much on clearing as fast as possible, as opposed to hard content that demands survivability. Currently, there is no content in the game that requires defense stats on anyone but certain niche characters. But could this change in the future? According to the quest, we will be reunited again. We're likely to see some kind of super mecha tentacle god octopus god thing in our future. Could this be the type of content these players are seeking? Should MiHoYo add mechanics to this game that makes defensive stats like HP and defense go down as non-support characters? To be frank, if we want to see defense be more useful, then you just have to add more characters that scale off it very well. Even if there is a really hard boss in this game, shields would probably be the default option, because it's just how strong they are. It is actually to a point, if we ever start considering building defense on regular characters, that the content would be so extremely different from what Genshin is doing, I prefer it didn't get released. It would have to be so completely different from what we've seen so far, and I don't think that's a good thing. Personally, I think having bosses that require more defensive mechanics like the Escada would be fun, even though that I've had some of my worst deaths due to that Toad, due to my lack of shield characters. But I don't think MiHoYo should change their game just to make a stat more useful when that change would be so extreme, nor do I think they even are. So for all these reasons, I don't think defense will ever be anything more than a niche stat for niche characters in this game. That's just how the game fundamentally works, and why I'll cry myself to sleep whenever I see one of these pop up on my screen. If you stuck through all this, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, though I hesitate a subscription. I'm still trying to figure out all this whole YouTube thing right now. But I plan on mostly focusing on being a channel around discussion topics around Genshin, so if you like that, maybe consider sticking around. Either way, I hope you have a nice day, and I hope your artifact luck is just a little bit better than mine.